Hello, everyone. I'm going to talk about the epithelial barrier theory, which is together with the global health crisis because the number of patients in our hospitals significantly increased during the last 60 years. And during the last 20 years, this increase is very visible. My talk will have first the introduction of type 2 response. What is a type 2 response? I'd like to talk to you about it first. Then I'll talk about the environment crisis starting and continuously growing after 1960s. Diseases linked to epithelial barrier damage and mechanisms of the epithelial barrier theory and biomarkers of barrier leakiness. Major threats to humanity and nature of the world is very important, and these are happening simultaneously and very strongly affecting our future. We are talking about global warming and climate change, which is a very major problem, of course. Then the talk today is about global and environment health crisis, exposure to toxic substances in our environment, and increased number of patients in all areas. And I'm going to talk about mainly a climate change, which is happening in our environment and in our body. And the third point is infections and antibiotic resistance, which is very important for the future of humanity. But the most important thing, and which is linked to all of these, is the ignorance and anti-science group and mentalities. Ignorance is in the public, but ignorance is also taking place in the politicians. So if you look at the origins of type 2 response, first I would like to now discuss with you the parasitic infections and how type 2 response is important in parasitic infections and it's life-saving. And we will go now here 90 years back to Zurich University Parasitology Department, and we discussed the mechanisms of Ascaris, schistosoma, and hookworms. And when the infective eggs are swallowed in the model of Ascaris, they reach to intestine and then they hatch. The hatching eggs become larvae, and the larvae migrate to liver. And the larvae in the liver are at the size of 0.5 to 1 millimeter. They are quite small. But then they migrate to the lungs. They go to the lungs through normal circulation, vena cava inferior, right atrium, right ventricular pulmonary artery, and when they come to the lungs, they start an eosinophilic pneumonia in the lungs. This is called the Loeffler's pneumonia, described 90 years ago. And Loeffler's pneumonia is an eosinophilic type 2 pneumonia. And the reason for this pneumonia is the larvae which came to the lungs are at the size of 0.5 to 1 millimeter. But if they get adults inside the lungs, the adults will be 10, 15, 20 centimeters, and this will be killing. So every single larva should be expulsed from the lungs, and this is a very important response. So the main reason for the type 2 response here, including Th2 cells, innate lymphoid cells, cytokines, interleukin-4, interleukin-13, interleukin-5, interleukin-33, is to expulse this larva, to throw all of them outside the lungs, and to avoid that the Ascaris or schistosoma or hookworms do not grow inside the lungs. So after this eosinophilic pneumonia, they are expulsed and they get mixed up with the sputum. Then they are ingested again and they are swallowed. And then they go to the intestines and they find a suitable place to grow adult. So if it doesn't happen, we see this very graphic picture, which is a killing thing. When these Ascaris grow in the lungs, it will be occluding all the bronchial tree. Now here is a skin example of this parasitic infections. This is scabies. Sarcoptes scabiei is the agent, and here this is the cover of our journal, and we can see here that this scabies is also causing an eosinophilic dermatitis. So what happened after 1960s to cause the global health crisis is a very important point. We have 350,000 new substances that are introduced to human lives. We know it from these publications. You can just enter the DOE number and find this paper. This paper is very interesting, and it is very good to know this as humans, but we didn't know it actually. Many of you still don't know these things. And this is an inventory developed from 22 chemical inventories from 19 countries. And it is saying that 350,000 or more chemicals and mixtures of chemicals have been registered for production and use. And this is actually a huge number. And there is substantial differences across countries. And what happened is that about 70,000 of these compounds are not well described, and 50,000 are not even named. We don't know the chemical structure of these compounds. They were reported as confidential compounds, that a patent is ongoing, or the companies did not want to give information, but they entered our lives and they ended up as pollution. That's a very important thing. Now we also bring together this with this the epidemics and the pandemics and the epidemiology of allergic diseases graph. We see here John Bostock in 1819, who described the first case of hay fever. And here we see Charles Blackley, who described the first 28 cases of hay fever. He also called it hay asthma in his paper. And Charles Blackley had 6 years to collect these 28 cases. The diseases started at that time, but they were not like a pandemic. So the prevalence continued to 1900 in the range of 1%, in 1961 to 2%. So the real pandemic size started in 1960s. You can see the numbers: 4.4%, 8.4%, 26%, 43%, and a very strong increase. So this was at the same time when these substances started to be increased, and until this time in the beginning, industrial revolution, the railways were very important. And then the oil industry joined, and together with oil industry, chemistry industry joined. In 1960s, the chemistry industry was very, very important, leading force of the world economics. Afterwards, we had the computer and IT. But currently, you can easily guess that the health industry is the main leading force in the world. So we have the chronic non-communicable diseases. In 1960s, there was 20-30 million patients. Currently, there is 2 billion patients. So what happened after 2000 is a second wave of these diseases started. We have food allergy, eosinophilic esophagitis, drug hypersensitivity. Food allergy was existing before in small numbers, but after 2000s, we have huge numbers. Peanut anaphylaxis was not existing at all. It became a huge public health problem in the range of 1 to 4%. And eosinophilic esophagitis was also very rare. The first series was reported from our institute with 13 cases. And now it is like 0.5% prevalence, which affects around 400 million patients in the whole world. So this is a very important reality. Together with this, we are talking about a pandemic of allergic and asthma, and also autoimmune diseases are increasing in parallel. So the allergy and asthma pandemic, we have some evidence how it started. In 1960s. It was noticed that asthma suddenly increased in almost every age group in England. In 1961, asthma increased in Finnish soldiers from 65 to 80. There was 10-fold increase in the number of hospitalizations of children with asthma in Australia, England, New Zealand, Canada, and the United States. And between 1971 and 1981, it was found that asthma increased by 3-fold in Swedish soldiers, especially in those who came from the cities. When East and West Germany were united, in the East Germany, the prevalence of allergic diseases, atopic dermatitis and asthma, was in the range of 1.5%, which increased to 10% within 5 to 10 years, and to the rates of the West Germany. So there's also another important point: a major shift in immune response to environmental substances after 1960s. There was almost no Ig and IgG response to allergens in 1970s and 1980s. This developed the ignorance hypothesis. Rolf Zinkernagel developed this hypothesis, and he was saying that we don't need to develop antibodies to environmental non-dangerous substances because they cannot induce a danger signal, and they cannot induce an inflammation or a disease because they cannot go to the lymphatic organs. So the danger hypothesis of Colli-Matzinger was in the same direction. But now we know that there's allergen-specific Ig and IgG response. After 2000s, Ig is approximately in around 40% of the population and 90% of the patients, and IgG is almost 100% at the age of 1 year against milk and egg in healthy population. So these are very important changes in human life. So we are working on epithelial barriers. Currently, it's better to understand what epithelial barriers is. Here is like lung mucosa. We see that at the very apical site, we see the epithelial barrier molecules are sealing the surface of the lung. And if these are the tight junctions, and there is 24 claudins, tricellulin and occludins, 24 claudins, tricellulin, that are playing an important role in sealing of the surface of the epithelium. So closed tight junctions means being preventive and protective against all the environmental agents, including allergens. Open tight junctions means if there is too much inflammation here, this inflammation should be drained, but at the same time, allergens, pollutants, toxins can go into deeper tissues. And here we look at closer to this area, the apical area that seals, even water cannot pass through. And we have here claudins, occludins, tricellins, making very strong covalent bonds. And this makes the surface of the epithelium.